You've probably heard me mention before that a study that had a great deal of impact on me was one that said that 25% of North Americans have a major fracture in their family. And I'm not talking about partners or spouses. I'm talking about estrangement in a family between parents and a child, or siblings, and sometimes close friends. Well, I saw an update to that study just this week, and it says that up to 60% of younger people, 60% have some kind of estrangement with a close friend or a close relative. And there are 3 reasons for that. When you survey people about why it is that they put some distance between themselves and those people that they love, they will tell you that the first factor is these people would not respect my decisions or my values, and so I felt the need to create that distance. The second factor was the people that I'm now estranged from were not good for my mental health. They were bringing me down, and so I created the distance. But the third factor was the biggest, and that is they're just too toxic. They're too negative all the time. And because of that negativity, they felt the need to find a place away from them. And that gives you, I think, some sense of what we're talking about today and how crucial it is that we don't slip into this idea of being negative all the time. Now, look, you're going to have your days. I certainly have mine. Days when things look a little more black and a little more bleak. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the kind of consistent negativity that makes people step back and fall away because it's just so pervasive. And the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that if we're not aware of that threat, it sometimes creeps up on us and we're not even aware of what's going on. So I want to talk today about why people are negative. I want to talk about what the effects that had. And then I want to also look at what we can do to make sure from a spiritual point of view and an emotional point of view that that is not going to happen to us. Because this is a spiritual issue. It's not addressed directly in the New Testament, except for the passage that we read today, and we're going to look at that in some detail. But we need to understand that toxic negativity is a spiritual problem. Tell me why. It might not seem to be one on the surface, but why is toxicity or negativity a spiritual problem? All right, if there is negativity that's so pervasive in your life that everybody can see it, it's probably a really good sign that you're not trusting in God, because one of the things that He asks us to do is to place that confidence in Him that we're going to be okay. Now notice, I didn't say that God expects that everything's going to be just peachy in your life. If you've been around the block a couple of times, you know that that's just not the case. But God is always promising to be there, to work in, with, and through us to make sure that we're going to be all right. We need to have that confidence. We need to have that trust that says, okay, even when things are not going well, my whole life is not falling apart. So yes, that's a very important point. What else? Why is it? Yes. And you know, that's a very important point. You've probably heard about something called neuroplasticity, and that is simply the concept which says scientists now know that pathways in the brain, neural pathways, can be changed. Your brain is plastic, and so it adapts, and mostly it adapts to habitual behavior. So if you are chronically negative, that becomes the default. That becomes the pathway that your neurons are going to fire along. But you can change that. And you can alter that to the point where if you are willing to do so, you can become much less negative and much more positive. But it takes effort, it takes practice, it takes intentionality. But let's understand that if you're negative, you're going to be bringing other people down. And perhaps that's why some people are going to find a distance. And if you're positive, then that is going to draw people, because you know and I know that positivity is not a virtue that a lot of people have. And so when we do practice that, when it becomes part of who we are, that is a draw. And that's another reason why this is a spiritual issue. If you are chronically negative, if you're always carping and complaining about what's going on in your life, that is not going to be an attractive feature. People are not going to be drawn to you, and they certainly aren't going to be drawn to Jesus if they see that He makes little difference in your life. So it's important to understand that there are not just physical and emotional factors at play here. There is a spiritual aspect to this as well. Let's remember what Susan said. There is a physical cost too, because we know that if you're always feeling down, if you give in to some of those chronic feelings, that it can affect your body. It can get to the point where you are just having way more problems than you should with things like stress, memory issues, productivity, motivation, and it leads to depression. All of those things have a huge physical impact on your body. And then, of course, the emotional ones are very self-evident. If you allow yourself to be negative all the time, well, that's what you're going to always see. Here's a principle to hold on to. You're going to find what you go looking for. Is that not true? If you go looking for the things in this world that are broken, that are dark, that are not what they're supposed to be, you will have no trouble finding those things whatsoever because they're everywhere. But if you go looking for beauty, and if you go looking for goodness, and the things that Paul is going to talk about in this passage, those are there in abundance, and it's a good way to balance things out. And as a matter of fact, balance is very much a part of what Paul talks about in Philippians 4. I want to go through this just a little bit in detail and see if we can't see how that has to do with what we're talking about today. First of all, he says, be full of joy in the Lord. Now, as we've said many times, and this comes up a lot at Christmas, joy is not the same as happiness. Joy is deeper. You cannot be happy if you're in the middle of something really deep and something really hard. It's virtually impossible to be happy because happiness is based on circumstance. Joy, on the other hand, is much deeper, and it has nothing to do with circumstance. It has to do with emotion, and it has to do with a rock-solid assurance that you're going to be okay because God says so. It's that trust we were talking about. Joy and trust go hand in hand. Paul wrote those words from a Roman prison, knowing in all likelihood he was going to die for his faith. Paul is not in a happy place, but Paul is in a joyful place because he knows that God is looking after him. God is caring for him. God is at work. And it should be with us, where if we really believe those principles, if we really believe that God is going to make do on the promises that he's given us, if we have every confidence that God is real and that he's actively involved in the small and the large circumstances of our lives, that should alter the way we allow things to affect us. We can be full of joy even when things are going terribly wrong, because joy is that bedrock assurance that God is moving. God is acting. God is with us. He says, I'll say it again, rejoice. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all you do. If people look at your life, would they say that you're considerate? Really, I think that just means placing the needs of others before your own. Are you someone who takes into account what's going on in the heart and the circumstances of other people? Do you take the time to listen? Are you engaged enough with people so that they can tell you what's really happening instead of just giving you the trite little platitudes that everybody else gets? Are you considerate? Or are you so wrapped up in your own negativity, your own blackness, that you can't even see what's happening in other people? I know a lot of people who feel like they get a pass. They don't have to worry about anybody else because look at what they're going through. And it becomes easy for us to fall into that, where we're so caught up in our own circumstances that we forget that we have to be there for other people. We don't get a pass just because we're taking our turn. Because we are all going to take our turn. We need to be considerate. We need to be aware. We need to be engaged with people. Remember, he says, the Lord is coming soon. That's an important process too. That idea that we need to remember that this is not the be-all and the end-all, that this is all temporary. That should alter the way we look at life as well. Because if we understand that this is not going to be the way it always is, any more than it is the way it's always been, then that should lift us out of the muck. That should help us have some confidence and some hope, and to really have that trust in God, because we understand that he is in control. And really, if you think about it, isn't that what negativity is all about? Think about this. If you really live your life from a point of view that says you have very little control over what happens, and there are all of these things happening that you just can't do anything about, that's going to send you down the rabbit hole. That's going to make you question everything. That will really do a number on your confidence and your hopefulness. Whereas if we really believe that God is involved with us, that he has not just wound up the universe like a giant clock and now lets it tick away on the shelf. If we firmly believe, truly believe, deeply believe that God is involved with you because he loves you, knows you and loves you even though he knows you. Wow, that's powerful stuff. And it means that we can trust him to see us through. And it means that the black times will be replaced eventually. And even if certain circumstances don't work out, he's not going to let us down. He's not going to let us go. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Really important to understand here, he's not talking about denial. God doesn't want you to pretend like everything in your life is okay. We talk to him just like we would talk with a close friend. We trust in him that he's going to be able to make a difference. We pray about everything. And yes, we need to be concerned about the things in our lives that are happening. That's not what Paul's saying. He's not saying don't be concerned. He's simply saying don't be paralyzed by worry when you've got another way. Don't be paralyzed by worry when you've got another way. And the way is Jesus. The way is that trust we talked about. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he's done. Why do you need to thank God for all he's done while you're telling him what you need? Explain that to me. It bolsters our faith because we can look back and see where we've been and how God has gotten us to where we are. That's a very good point. One of the ways in which we can escape toxicity is to remember the faithfulness of God, and we can go back to those times in our lives when everything did seem hopeless and dark, and yet we were delivered. Now, sometimes God is going to calm the storm. He's going to make sure that things work out. Sometimes he's not going to calm the storm. He's going to calm you instead. He's going to make sure you can get through the storm. Now, look, I really need to point out here that there are lots of reasons why that negativity is such a big part of life. Sometimes that has to do with personality. And the research is pretty solid on this. We are all predisposed to certain kinds of behavior because of our personalities. And personality, of course, is shaped, and it can be changed. But some people are just much more pessimistic than others. That's just the way some of us are wired, and many of us will have to work through that. Others of us are more optimistic. But it is easy to become cynical, especially if you grew up in a family or circumstances where everything was always harsh and critical. Do you not understand that some people are so negative because they have been trained that way by the way in which people have treated them for a very long time? And I really have to work at making sure that I take that into account when I'm dealing with people I don't know. It's really easy to write people off just because they're difficult or they're negative and all the rest of that. But we have to recognize there are lots of good reasons why people are the way they are. Good in the sense that it's really not their fault and they're struggling. And we need to help them with that struggle. It could be personality, it could be family, it could be constant criticism in all of the relationships that these people have had. It could be something as simple as depression, because most of us have been there. You know that depression can rob you of your motivation, it can rob you of your positivity, it can rob you of so many good things. You can get those things back. Balance can be restored, but it's not always going to be easy, and we need to give people the love and the respect while they're working things out. Low self-esteem will also make you incredibly, incredibly negative. Life experiences and trauma will make you incredibly negative. There are good reasons why people feel bad, and that does not excuse chronic negativity. It doesn't mean we can leave people in that, but it does mean that we need to love and encourage them and to help them instead of just walking away like so many people are prone to do. it does make a difference. Paul says, you need to tell God what you need. And while you're at it, thank him for what he's done for you, because that will not only give you that sense of faithfulness that was just mentioned, it will also give you perspective and equilibrium. It will give you balance, because trust me, if all you're going to do is look at your life and see all of the stuff that's wrong, that is going to take you in one direction. If you can look at your life and say, okay, here is a list of things that I'm not happy about. Here are things that I would desperately love to change. But you can still look over here and see all of the blessings that are yours, all of the good things that you still have no matter what. That is going to help you stay psychically in the middle, where you're not going to fall over the edge into despair. And you're not going to be so pie in the sky happy that you're denying the reality of your own existence and all the troubles that come with that. There are going to be things in your life this week, this month, this year, this lifetime that you can't control and that you would not wish for yourself. God knows. God cares. And God will work in those things. But he wants us to understand that we are blessed beyond measure, no matter what's going on in your life. That should help you be able to hang on during those times when you're still waiting for things to be resolved, because there is a price to be paid if you don't. He says, don't worry about anything, pray about everything, tell God what you need, thank him for what he's done. If you do this, notice this is conditional. If you do this, you will experience God's peace, which is far more wonderful than the human mind can even understand. His peace will guard your hearts and your minds as you live in Christ Jesus. It'll guard your heart and your mind from despondency and despair. It will guard your hearts and minds against a lack of peace and tranquility and serenity. It will guard your heart and your mind against giving up. This really is important stuff. Fix your thoughts on what's true, honorable, right. Think about things that are pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you learned from me and heard from me and saw me doing, and the God of peace will be with you. So let me ask you this. Where is the preponderance of your pondering? What do you think about the most? Is it the stuff that's worrying you, the stuff that frustrates you, the stuff that makes you angry? Or are you thinking about things that are good? Because all of that is how God takes care of his kids. I like to think one of the reasons you're here this morning is because you recognize that this group gives you something you would not have, perhaps in any other way, were it not for the fact that you can come here and be who you are. I like to think that you're here this morning because you not only want to pay homage to God, you not only want to honor him, but you also want to encourage your brothers and sisters, because you get the fact that life is hard. And life is better when you're not on your own. And I'd like to think that when we're done with some of these things, it does make a difference in the way we live. So let me ask you this. How do we get around negativity? Just as we wrap this up, what can you do in a practical way to be less negative and more positive? It's not hard to figure out, and there's some big clues right here. What do? You think about your blessings. One of the things that we know from psychology, and this is borne out over and over again in this collection of books, one of the things we know is that the more grateful you are, the more stable you become. Gratitude is a wonderful blessing because it does protect us from falling into that trap of only seeing the bad. The more grateful you intend to be, the more grateful you will become. Just write down every day this week what you're grateful for, the blessings of God that are yours, and see if that doesn't make a difference in balancing out some of the other stuff. What else can we do? Practice gratitude, yes. Honor God as the author of every good and perfect gift, as James says. What else? I think that's absolutely true. If you have a quality relationship with someone who allows you to do this, you need to be able to say, okay, I get it. I understand you're frustrated. I know that things are looking dark, but we need to just be careful that we don't fall into the trap of only seeing those things. We can turn conversations around. We can point in a different direction. We can model for them ways of dealing with the things that are so hard. That really counts. We can't just leave people where they are. Now, mind you, we do sometimes need to let people vent. That's allowed. If you've done any counseling with me at all, and a great many of you in this room have, you will know that I will give you lots of opportunity to talk. But if you come back into my office after we've discussed things a lot and we've identified options and you've done nothing, then I'm going to say to you, we're not going to replow this field yet again. Because there's a time when you have to insist that people begin to make some progress. They have to make it in their own way on their own time, but you do not have to leave people where they are if they're showing no inclination to do anything about their circumstances. So yes, there's a time when we need to have that tough love that says, all right, what are you going to do about this? It's one thing to identify the problem. We've looked at options. Now, what are you going to do? And if they're not willing to do anything, it's not helpful for you just to let them whinge and carp and complain incessantly. There has to be a point at which we take some action. What else? Other people can help us find balance. And of course, that's one of the things that we can do to bolster our own positivity, is to be around positive people. But yes, it has to be genuine. It has to be authentic. Because if it's not, people are going to see through that in no time. And they're not going to respect something that is based on a forced smile and a forced attitude. It has to be real. It has to be legitimate and authentic. Good point. Very important point. Our testimony, our witness is essential for people who are going through things that they feel powerless to do anything about. If we can demonstrate that we've been where they are, that God has gotten us through, that He did deliver us, that does give them hope that if it can happen to us, it can happen to them. It's one of the most powerful forms of evangelism there is. We need to be able to be honest about where we've been too, to have that vulnerability that says, yeah, I know how you feel right now because I've been there. Took me a long time to get out, but God made a difference in my life. So testimony, yeah, that counts for an awful lot. This is an important process. What you go looking for is what you will find. What you go looking for will also determine who you become, because those are the things you're going to focus on. And there is much in this life that is still good and wonderful. Surround yourself with those things. Talk about those things. Think about those things. Find your balance in worship, in prayer, in meditation, in good, positive people who will share your views and your mind. And you will be amazed at the difference that will make. It can change. Wherever you are, even if you consider yourself to be a very negative person today, it can change. If you do some of the things we've talked about today, at first it's not going to seem like much. You won't think that you've changed much, even though you have. But after a while, you'll find that you have positively changed.